To understand the world, knowledge is not enough. You must see it, touch it, live in its presence. So wrote Teilhard de Chardin in The Hymn of the Universe. I sometimes think that we humans are like those horses with blinkers on. We tend to just look at what is in front of us and fail to open our eyes and senses to the world around us. I love those quiz questions that give you images of well-known buildings, pictures taken of their rooftops or at strange angles, and you have to guess what and where they are. We don't tend to look up very often, and perhaps we have forgotten to look around us. During the first lockdown last March, many people spoke about how they could hear the birds and took more notice of their surroundings in their daily walks. It almost felt as if the earth was beginning to rejuvenate. But we also know that we are living in desperate times. Our young people are urging us to take climate change more seriously, and many Christians are preparing for the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow in November. We know that the climate is changing. We have been watching snow in Texas cause havoc in a state more used to sunshine. You may have also seen the images of snowy owls that have appeared in Central Park in New York for the first time in 130 years. When I was young, we definitely had 4 distinct seasons. Nowadays in the UK, our winters are more wet than cold, and flooding is becoming more commonplace. This week, we are thinking about the environment and inviting all of us to open our eyes and our senses and to look around us. Only last week, David Attenborough was inviting all of us to spend 10 minutes sitting or standing still and just observing what is going on around you. What do you notice? What do you see? What do you hear? You might like to try and give it a try for the week. Our scripture reading is the parable of the unjust steward. And here we begin to think about our role and responsibility to look after the earth we have been given to live in and to care for. But before that, we listen to the wisdom of Bob Gilbert, an environmentalist, author and broadcaster, who shares some thoughts with us on the ways we can open our eyes to the awe and wonder of the environment and to discover God in the urban, in the rural, and even in the environment of your own sitting room.
Okay, I'm Bob Gilbert and I live in the East End of London in Poplar, and I'm a writer and occasional broadcaster on environmental subjects. I suppose my particular passion is for urban ecology and for the idea of seeing what is around you wherever you happen to be, whether it's the plant that grows in the crack in the paving stone, or the moss that grows on the top of the wall, or the fern that flourishes behind a leaking downpipe. But it's awareness of whatever's around you, whatever the context and however unpromising it might seem.
If you were shielding at home or you're isolated and not going out and about at the moment, what sort of ways can people engage, I guess, or look around and engage in the environment if they're staying at home?
Look out of your window. And yeah, just watch more slowly and more closely. And you can do little studies as well. I mean, if you do have just a few bird feeders outside your window, it is very interesting just to not to be aware that some birds are coming and going, and not just to name them actually, but to, if I look out of my window now, I notice that the sparrows come and they sit on the feeders and they feed in one particular way. They just go for it. They just become almost unaware of everything around them and guzzle. If you watch the blue tits and the grey tits, they come in a completely different way. They come one at a time. They're very cautious. They take one bit of seed and they dash off again. And all these different birds we have coming here, they all have different habits. They seem to come at different times of day. They are sometimes easily, put to flight by causes that I can't fathom. So it's not just watching them, it's asking yourself these questions really and developing this familiarity, and it opens, asking questions just opens all sorts of wonders to you. Or you can just watch the sequence in which, through your small patch of window, the sequence in which buds are beginning to burst and leaves are beginning to break on the trees around you, or the sequence in which flowers are beginning to open. The hazel catkins have been on the one shrub I can see from my window. They've been there since December. But when I look more closely, the tiny, tiny little crimson female flowers have just opened in the last couple of weeks. So I guess it is developing that really wonderful familiarity with the commonplace is what you can do by just looking through your own window. Stewarding to me is an idea that we are in charge and we're running things and we have to make the right decisions. The biblical message that really relates to me around creation is the idea that we, alongside all other created things, are part of a great hymn of praise to the Almighty. And I rather like that idea, that we are there magnifying God as a multiplicity of species, rather than that humanity is out there as a separate species which somehow has charge and God's authority to run things in the right way, because we haven't run things in the right way and we're not likely to unless we develop some sort of humility, I think, and acknowledge our lack of wisdom and our lack of understanding and our place alongside rather than above everything else.
Our young people are very passionate about climate change at the moment. Do you think us in the church, adults, are we listening enough to what our young people are demanding from us?
Thank God they are, and I think that's been the most wonderful development of the last few years. The ending of quietism and young people getting passionate about not just about climate change, but about environmental issues in general. But I think there has been two areas. One is the church runs behind picking up issues. When they become slightly more acceptable and slightly more fashionable, then the church is there trying to catch up. So we run behind instead of striding ahead. And the second thing is, up till now, I think we've been rather mechanistic about it. I think the church it's focused on how do we make our buildings more environmental? How do we make our practices more sustainable? How are we insulating the church roof or using fair trade food or whatever it might be? Now, all of those things are important, but they should not be the church's core message. The church should be giving the spiritual lead in this. The church should be setting the spiritual tone, if you know what I mean. And this idea that all creation praises the Maker, this idea that everything is sacramental. And I think that should have come first. And I think it should have been our core spiritual message as an alternative to the consumerist messages which surround us everywhere else. That's what we should be focused on, our spiritual message primarily, and only secondarily where we've got the secondary glazing in the church hall. One of the things I've been working on, and I'm writing an article with my oldest son who's doing an MSc in sustainability, and it kind of arises from that experience during lockdown, and it's and where we go afterwards. And you're aware probably that there's a huge rewilding movement. The rewilding movement it's very big, and it's a movement to allow whole parts of our natural environment to return to a wild state. But I'm a little bit nervous about it, because I think there's an idea of nature out there and an idea of nature in here. And the idea of nature out there is that we set aside places like nature reserves. That's a really telling name, isn't it? Nature reserves, or that we allow areas to rewild, to go back to nature. And I'm not against that, but I really think it needs to be complemented by this idea of nature in here, that we need to develop cities and ways of growing our food and ways of living where we actually live alongside other species, you know, as opposed to setting aside special places for what the wild, which implies that the rest of it is not wild, the rest of it is ours. And so we're working on this idea of the biodiverse city and how you can actually develop a city which is suitable for the mutual benefit of multiple species. And I think that's a really important path to be looking at. It's about living alongside and with the natural world rather than seeing it as something. So it does kind of relate to what you were saying about stewardship, your question about stewardship.
Thank you very much.
Okay, nice to talk.
Jesus said to his disciples,
"There was a certain rich man who had a manager.
An accusation was made to him that this man was wasting his possessions.
He called him and said to him,
'What is this that I hear about you? Give an accounting of your management, for you can no longer be manager.'
The manager said within himself,
'What will I do, seeing that my Lord is taking away the management position from me?
I don't have strength to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I will do, so that when I'm removed from management, they may receive me into their houses.'
Calling each one of his lord's debtors to him, he said to the first,
'How much do you owe to my lord?'
He said,
100 measures of oil.
He said to him,
'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and write 50.
Then he said to another, 'How much do you owe?'
He said,
100 measures of wheat.
He said to him,
'Take your bill and write 80.
His lord commended the dishonest manager because he had done wisely. For the children of this world are, in their own generation, wiser than the children of the light.
I tell you,
Make for yourselves friends by means of unrighteous mammon, so that when you fail, they may receive you into eternal tenants.
He who is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much.
He who is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much.
If therefore you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches?
If you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own?
No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to one and despise the other. You aren't able to serve God and serve mammon.
So how might we pray with this piece of scripture? The invitation is to take some time to be still, to find sanctuary in a demanding world, to enter into a story from the Bible and enjoy the spiritual peace that this can bring. Begin by making sure that you are sitting or lying in a position which is comfortable. Don't worry if your mind wanders. Often it wanders to a place that brings insight or healing. If it wanders somewhere unhelpful, just gently bring it back. Picture yourself with Jesus and his followers in the Judean hill country. Jesus is teaching. A rich man employed an estate manager, but having heard that the man was neglecting his duties, he called him in and said, "I want a report of my finances because you're going to be fired." The manager said to himself, "What would I do without a job? I'm not suited to manual labour. I'm too proud to beg." Then he made a plan so that people would welcome him into their homes after he lost his job. One by one, he called in the people who owed his master money. He asked the first one, "How much do you earn?" The man replied, 100 barrels of olive oil. So the manager took his own commission off the amount and said, "Take your bill and write 50. He asked someone else who owed his master money, "How much do you owe?" 1,000 sacks of wheat, the man answered. Cancelling his own commission again, the manager said, "Take your bill and write 800. The master praised his shrewd manager for looking out for himself so well. Jesus continues, "That's how it is. The people of this world are shrewder in their dealings with their own kind than other people who belong to the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to benefit others, so that when it's gone, you'll be welcomed into an eternal home. Whoever can be trusted with little can also be trusted with much. But whoever is untrustworthy with little will be untrustworthy with much. So if you cannot be trusted with worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? And if you haven't been faithful with what belongs to someone else, who will give you something that will be your own? No one can fully serve two masters. You cannot serve God and money. Jesus explains that the time of teaching is over and beckons you to follow him. Together you walk to the hilltop and sit down. Jesus invites you to share with him whatever is on your mind, whatever is in your heart. Just take that opportunity now. And now listen as Jesus responds to what you have shared with him. Just be open to his response, whether it be in actions or as a feeling or an image or in words. Hear him speak your name and wait for his response. Hold on to anything that Jesus has shared with you and become aware of your feelings. Just rest in God's presence. When you are ready, end your meditation by gently and slowly bringing yourself back to this time and to this place.
If you can play the following meditation on your phone and in headphones, then even better. Venture outside. This might be on your COVID-mandated exercise or just by opening the door to where you live. It doesn't matter. Life still happens, and today you are to look around and bear prayerful witness to it. No matter where you live, the natural world intrudes. Regardless of whether the view out of your back door is rolling hills and countryside, a garden, an urban street, or a tower block, even in the cracks in the pavement, in the bits in between the urban landscape, life is present. A sprout of grass, a dandelion, a carefully nurtured planter of growing life. Evidence of animal activity can be seen. Deer intruding where they shouldn't be. Dogs and cats, mice, insects, and, yes, human activity, changing the world around you for better or worse. There is nowhere where God's creation does not rudely intrude, because God's presence is inescapable. So pause for a moment to look around. Even amid the concrete, there is evidence of life's presence. Look closely at a flower bud or a blade of grass, a weed or a plant. It has pushed its way into existence. Happenstance might have placed it here, or someone's careful plan, and it has rooted. Below ground, from a tiny seed or a promising bulb, a cutting placed in hope or an off-chance blown in the wind, roots have taken. Roots take time to develop, and fruit cannot come until roots are laid down. So often, we want the fruit immediately, but we have to grow, often in hidden, unseen ways, before that can take place. Look at the shape of this plant as it seeks to grow towards the light, a light that it did not actually know was there until it broke the ground, but strove to grow nonetheless, reaching out, reaching up, boldly or tentatively, but always imbued with promise and hope. Have you broken ground yet? Or are you still striving in the darkness of the underground to move towards that light that just has to be there? Even when the light has found you, the growing is only beginning as the warmth and strength of that light enables you to become whom you are to be. Look at its colour, perhaps varied, perhaps uniform, green or something else. A shade which represents who it is currently, not necessarily what it will grow into. A myriad of possibilities. The soil you are planted in may be rich and nourishing, or paltry, poor and inhospitable. Your fruit may be born easily, your seed spread wide, or every moment may be a struggle for survival in a difficult place. But we strive to grow. We seek to be transformed. We fight to become whom the light enables us to be. The light is always there. Trust in the presence of that light. Trust in God.